My name is Skylar, and I was 24 the night my family decided the Valley Ranch was worth saving more than I was. The flood warnings had been screaming across every phone in the county for 2 days. A major dam upstream was failing. Mandatory evacuation. People were moving heavy machinery, dragging livestock feed inside, stuffing legal papers into trash bags, and leaving before the river roads closed. I thought I was leaving, too. I had already put my mud boots by the door and packed food for the 2 rescue herding dogs and the old barn cat who slept under my desk. Then my mother looked at the animals, looked at the packed trucks, and said someone had to stay behind because evacuation centers did not take large animals, and thieves loved empty ranches after floods. I laughed because I thought she was joking. Nobody laughed back. My father carried heavy plywood to the office cabin window and nailed it shut from the outside. When I asked why he was boarding my workstation after telling everyone else to get in the SUV, he said it was so I would not get any ideas once the river water got bad. My mother took the last truck. My brother Brandon got the back seat. My aunt held a cooler full of frozen steaks on her lap. I stood on the porch with 3 terrified animals behind me while my father flipped the main breaker before leaving. The whole house went dark before the flood even arrived. 6 hours later, my phone died. 19 hours later, I was still sitting on top of the heavy wooden drafting table with wet blankets floating below me, one dog shaking against my ribs, the cat clawing my hoodie, and the freezing current slamming into the structural walls so hard I thought the ceiling was coming down. And I smiled. Not because I was brave. Not because I was fine. I smiled because for the first time in my life, I finally understood exactly what I was to them. But before I tell you what happened 14 days later, when my phone exploded with 74 missed calls and my father begged me to stop. Tell me this first. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story travels before they realize the truth did not stay buried under that mud. My father's name was Grant. And the worst part about him was not that he was always cruel. It was that he knew exactly when to act kind so other people would never believe what happened inside our house. He worked for the county maintenance department for almost 20 years, which meant he understood flood risks and infrastructure failures better than most people. He knew what a dam breach could do to a foundation, a pasture, a structural wall, a young adult trapped inside a dark, boarded cabin. My mother, Lydia, worked in the front office of an elementary school and volunteered at the community center every Thanksgiving. People called her patient, generous, and selfless. They said she had a gift for making children feel safe. I used to wonder if I was the only child that gift never reached. My brother Brandon was 3 years younger than me, but somehow he had always been treated like the child my parents had been waiting for. I was the accident they had too young. He was the second chance they were proud to show off. When Brandon got a C in school, my mother taped the paper to the refrigerator and said he was trying his best under a lot of pressure. When I graduated at the top of my class with a technical degree, my father barely looked up from his coffee and said, "That is what you are supposed to do when we give you a roof over your head." Brandon got a new dirt bike before the season started. I got his old laptop when he decided the screen glare was annoying. Aunt Marlene moved into our ranch house when I was 19 after what she called a rough patch. That rough patch lasted years. She never paid a dime for groceries, never helped clean the barns, and somehow still had opinions about how cold and ungrateful I was. She called Brandon her sweet prince and called me calculated. She told my mother I had an unforgiving face, like I was always keeping a ledger against them. Maybe I was. Maybe even then I could feel the truth sitting in every room with us, quiet and heavy. The only person who ever made me feel wanted was my grandmother, Nana Clara. She lived about 15 minutes away, down the valley in an old farmhouse with stone chimneys, and a weather vane that spun every time the wind came down from the mountains. Nana Clara was the one who came to my university presentations, even when they were just about zoning laws. She was the one who taught me how to operate the heavy farm tractors in an empty field. She was the one who kept my favorite coffee in her pantry because she noticed my mother only bought the juice Brandon liked. When I was young, I thought Nana was just extra loving. When I got older, I understood she was filling a space my parents had left empty on purpose. She never explicitly said my parents resented me. She was too careful for that. But once, when I was 21, She watched my mother completely forget my college graduation dinner because Brandon had a minor dirt bike race. And Nana looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Skylar, never beg people to see your worth when they have trained themselves to look away." I did not understand how important that sentence would become until the flood, because the night they left me behind in the locked valley cabin was not some shocking change in who they were. It was not a good family making one bad decision under pressure. It was the most honest thing they had ever done. They had spent my whole life showing me that my comfort came last. My fear came last. My safety came last. The thundering flood only gave them a chance to prove it when nobody else was watching. And when they came back after 19 hours, soaked from the hotel parking lot and irritated that highway traffic had been bad, my mother did not run to check on me. She walked right past me into the flooded kitchen and asked if the wet dogs had ruined the hardwood floors. My father checked the structural stability of the barn windows before he even looked at my face. Brandon complained that the hotel's complimentary breakfast had been terrible. Aunt Marlene grumbled that she had barely slept because the guest pillows were too firm. I stood in the muddy hallway with my hoodie still heavily scratched from the cat's claws and told them calmly that I thought I was going to drown. My mother sighed deeply, looking at me like I had thoroughly embarrassed her. "Skylar, stop being so dramatic. The main structures are still standing." My father shrugged and said, "You were 24, old enough to handle a little rising water." Brandon smirked from the couch and added, "Honestly, I would be grateful they trusted you to guard the family assets." Aunt Marlene chimed in. "Some girls your age would love that kind of responsibility." That was the exact moment I stopped, trying to make them understand. I had survived a catastrophic flash flood, but somehow the quiet after they returned felt infinitely colder than the freezing current. For the next year, I became exceptionally good at disappearing while still living under their roof. I stopped telling my mother when something hurt. I stopped asking my father for maintenance assistance. I stopped reacting entirely when Brandon made slick jokes about me being the family ghost. I learned that silence could be a highly effective shield if you wore it long enough. At work and online, people thought I was incredibly focused. My professors called me highly mature. The academic advisors said I possessed a powerful sense of direction. They did not know that direction was just another word for escape. Every advanced certification form I filled out felt like a small door opening. Every specialized university website I visited in secret felt like oxygen. I specifically chose institutions far enough away that nobody could casually ask me to come down to help with the morning chores, but close enough that Nana Clara could still drive up to visit if she wanted to. I told absolutely no one except her. When I finally admitted I was applying to graduate programs out of town, Nana did not cry or try to talk me out of it. She made hot tea, set a plate of butter cookies between us, and asked, "How much capital do you need to get free, Skylar?" I almost broke down right there, not because I was sad, but because nobody in my entire life had ever asked me that question before. My parents always talked about money like I was a constant drain and a cost. Nana talked about it like it was a precise tool. I secured a full scholarship to a university in Raleigh and chose a highly rigorous program connected to disaster planning, agricultural insurance compliance, and valley property risk. People asked why a girl with my background wanted to study infrastructure codes, evacuation rules, and industrial liability reports. I simply told them storms and rivers interested me. That was much easier than saying I wanted to fully understand every legal and mechanical system that had failed me. I wanted to know exactly what people were legally required to do, morally required to do, and what happened when they willfully ignored both. The day after my final exams, I packed exactly one suitcase and one heavy duffel bag. My mother stood in the kitchen scrolling mindlessly through her phone while I carried my things out to Nana's car. She coldly asked if I was sure I wasn't just making a scene. My father didn't even look up, only asking when I would be back to help clear out the irrigation ditches. Brandon told me not to act too fancy just because I was heading to a university. Aunt Marlene muttered from the hallway that educated girls always came back with terrible attitudes. Nana Clara was waiting outside with the engine running and a box of sandwiches on the passenger seat. I distinctly remember looking back at the ranch house before I stepped into the vehicle, not with a shred of sadness, but with this strange, empty calm. Some people leave home and feel like they are losing a vital part of themselves. I felt like I was finally leaving behind a suffocating costume that had never fit. University did not heal me overnight. Freedom is not magic. The first time a colleague asked where my family was during a major holiday weekend, I lied smoothly and said they were busy with the harvest. The first time a heavy thunderstorm knocked out the electricity in my apartment building, I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes before I could make my legs stand up. But slowly, I built a structured life that did not require a single ounce of their approval. I studied harder than anyone around me because I knew exactly what kind of darkness I was running from. I worked part-time in the campus housing administration office, then interned with a regional agricultural insurance firm, then spent 2 full summers reviewing flood damage reports for commercial properties along the valley floor. I learned exactly how building structures failed, how massive claims were legally denied, how county evacuation plans were systematically written, and how easily people lied when corporate money was involved. Every single skill I gained became another heavy lock on the door between me and my family. My parents barely called. When they did, it was exclusively because they wanted something small enough to pretend it wasn't a massive favor. Could I explain an agricultural tax form? Could I look over a strict zoning letter from the county maintenance board? Could I wire Brandon emergency cash because he had gotten himself into trouble with another heavy dirt bike payment? I always said no. Nana Clara, however, called every Sunday night without fail. She asked about my graduate classes, my friends, what I was eating, and whether I had truly laughed that week. She visited me twice a year and always brought homemade pecan bars in a worn tin box. During one of those quiet visits, when I was 26, she sat in my tiny apartment and finally told me the absolute truth about the Valley Ranch. My parents had been living on her property for decades, paying absolutely nothing. The old Valley estate was completely hers, not theirs. They had moved into the ranch house when I was small because they claimed they needed financial help getting back on their feet. Then they simply never left. They treated her land like an inheritance they had already legally received. Nana paid the property taxes when they fell behind. Nana covered structural barn repairs when they completely ignored them. Nana kept giving because she desperately thought, maybe if they had absolute stability, they would eventually become better, kinder parents. Her voice changed when she said that. It got much smaller, heavy with regret. I was completely wrong about them. Skylar. I told her gently not to blame herself. She squeezed my hand tightly and said, I do not blame myself for loving my daughter, sweetie. I blame myself for hoping that my love would eventually make her kinder to you. Then she told me something that made my stomach completely twist. She had quietly changed her will. The entire Valley Ranch would go to me. I told Nana Clara not to do it. That was my absolute first reaction. Not because I did not want the Valley Ranch, but because I knew exactly what would happen the moment the legal system got involved. My mother would say I manipulated an old woman in her final years. My father would claim I stole directly from the family heritage. Brandon would talk endlessly about fairness, as if fairness had ever lived for a single day in our house. Aunt Marlene would call me greedy from a bedroom she had never paid a single cent to occupy. Nana Clara listened to all of that and simply nodded like she had already expected every single word before I even opened my mouth. Then she looked at me and said, Skylar, that ranch protected people who never protected you. When I am gone, I want it to protect you. I did not have an answer for that. 3 years later, Nana passed away quietly in her sleep after making her morning coffee and feeding the birds on her front porch. That specific detail almost broke me. She had left the world exactly the way she lived in it, quietly taking care of things smaller than herself. I flew back for the funeral service and intentionally kept my distance from my family. My mother cried loudly at the service, leaning heavily into people's arms and accepting comfort like she had been Nana's most devoted daughter every single day of her life. My father stood incredibly stiff beside her, playing the perfect role of a grieving son-in-law for the community. Brandon wore a dark suit and looked thoroughly bored until someone casually mentioned the property. Aunt Marlene whispered just loudly enough for others to hear that Nana had always been strange and distant about me. I did not respond. I had learned that silence made people incredibly nervous when they expected you to beg. The will was officially read 2 weeks later. I was not in the room with them. My attorney called me immediately after the meeting concluded, and exactly 10 minutes after that,
My phone started ringing.
My mother called 11 times before finally leaving a venomous voicemail that began with fake confusion and ended with real, unbridled rage. My father texted a short, cold command. "Call me now." Brandon sent a long, manipulative message about how Nana would never want to divide the family, as if the family had not been deeply divided since the exact day I was born. Aunt Marlene texted that I had poisoned an elderly woman against her own flesh and blood. I read every single message, then placed my phone face down on my desk and quietly went back to my work. That was the first time I fully understood that power did not have to be loud. For years, they had completely controlled every story, every room, and every rule. Now, a single piece of paper with Nana's signature had changed the locks on all of it. I could have evicted them immediately, but I did not. That would have made the story far too easy for them to weaponize. They would have cried to the whole valley that I threw grieving parents out on the street right after a funeral. So I did exactly what my career in risk compliance had trained me to do. I used structure. I used documentation. I used strict legal terms they could not twist without completely exposing themselves. I sent a formal lease agreement at market rent with crystal clear rules about property occupancy, land maintenance, payment deadlines, and absolute interference with sale or inspection rights. Only my parents were approved as legal tenants. Aunt Marlene was not listed. Brandon was not listed. No long-term guests were allowed without my explicit written permission. My mother called it completely humiliating. My father called it deeply disrespectful. Brandon said making your own parents sign a lease was disgusting. Aunt Marlene said Nana would be thoroughly ashamed of me. I told them very calmly that they had exactly 30 days to sign the agreement or vacate the property. They signed on day 28. I still remember staring at their signatures when the copy came back to me. Grant, Lydia. The two people who once left me trapped in the dark now legally needed my permission to keep sleeping under that roof. For 3 years, I kept everything strictly professional. I did not insult them. I did not visit for major holidays. I did not answer emotional, guilt-tripping texts. Rent was strictly due on the 1st. Late fees systematically applied after the 5th. Maintenance requests had to be submitted entirely in writing. My mother absolutely hated that most of all. She desperately wanted emotional phone calls where she could cry, accuse, and rewrite family history in real time. I gave her structured email threads. My father wanted to intimidate me with heavy silence and short, cold commands. I gave him scanned, professional documents. They slowly learned that the version of me they had raised to be quiet had grown into someone who kept meticulous records. Then, during the 3rd year, the rental payment started coming late. First by 3 days, then by 2 weeks. Then 1 full month was missing entirely. Around that exact same time, Brandon suddenly became incredibly friendly again. He texted out of nowhere to ask how I was doing. He sent a clean picture of his new business card from a real estate office and said, "Maybe we should finally catch up as adults." I knew immediately that something was fundamentally wrong. Brandon had never reached for my hand unless someone standing behind him wanted my palm opened. Brandon's sudden friendliness lasted exactly 4 superficial messages before the real reason slipped through. He said Dad's health had been exceptionally rough lately. He said Mom was under an immense amount of stress. He said the sheer size of the Valley Ranch was becoming too much for them to handle, but moving at their advanced age would be emotionally devastating. He said he had been thinking, strictly as a real estate professional, that maybe there was a smart solution that worked perfectly for everyone. Whenever someone in my family said everyone, they meant them. I let him keep talking. He told me my parents had managed to gather about $55, zero by completely emptying their savings, borrowing from close church friends, selling my father's old fishing boat, and pressuring Brandon to contribute. They wanted to offer it as a substantial down payment to buy the entire ranch property from me at what he generously called a family price. The Valley property was worth several times that amount. The land alone had recently become astronomically valuable because short-term rural trees and agricultural commercialization had completely exploded in that specific part of the valley. I asked Brandon what he honestly thought a family price meant. He said it meant not treating the exact people who raised me like absolute strangers. I almost laughed out loud. Raised me was such a generous, unearned phrase for what they had actually done. People raise children by actively protecting them. My parents had stored me in that boarded office cabin, like cheap storm furniture. I told Brandon I would consider the offer, but only after I completed a formal, in-person inspection of the Valley Ranch to assess its true structural and environmental condition. He agreed instantly over text, his messages practically dripping with relief. He thought his smooth real estate pitch had cracked my armor. He thought the quiet girl from the dark cabin was finally giving in. 2 days later, I drove down the valley without giving them a specific arrival time. I pulled my truck onto the gravel driveway at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday. The ranch looked fundamentally different from the neat estate Nana Clara used to keep. The fences along the pasture were leaning. Overgrown weeds choked the irrigation ditches, and Brandon's expensive new real estate vehicle was parked right next to the main barn. I walked up to the house without knocking, using my legal owner's key to slide the front door open. The thick smell of expensive cigars and heavy cooking hit me instantly. I walked into the living room, and the entire scene completely froze. My father was sitting in his recliner, looking entirely healthy as he laughed at a sports game on the television. My mother was organizing a large stack of brand-new home design magazines on the coffee table. Brandon was leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass of whiskey, and sitting right on the couch, surrounded by half-packed cardboard boxes, was Aunt Marlene. She had a massive ring on her finger and was casually folding a set of high-end silk curtains. They all stared at me as if a ghost had just walked through the drywall. My mother dropped her magazine. Brandon slowly lowered his glass. Aunt Marlene quickly tried to slide a box out of my direct line of sight with her foot. My father's face went from relaxed to instantly defensive in less than a second. Brandon tried to recover first, stepping forward with that hollow, professional smile. "Skylar, you're early. We were just helping Mom get some things sorted out." I did not look at him. I looked directly at Aunt Marlene, then at the boxes, and then at the formal lease agreement sitting on the kitchen counter. "Aunt Marlene is not an approved occupant on the lease," I said, my voice dead calm. "And these boxes belong to her. She has been living here illegally for the last 8 months. My mother stood up, her voice instantly rising into that sharp, hysterical frequency she used whenever she was caught in a lie. "Skylar, she is family!" She had nowhere else to go after her apartment lease ended. "How can you be so utterly heartless?" My father slammed his fist on the arm of his chair, trying to use the old boardroom authority that had worked on me when I was 24. "This is still my house. Girl!" I signed the paper. "I decide who sits on the couch." I quietly pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just opened the camera app, switched it to video mode, and slowly swept the lens across the room, capturing my father's perfectly healthy condition, Aunt Marlene's illegal presence, and the brand new luxury appliances they had bought while claiming they couldn't afford the rent. Brandon tried to reach for my wrist to lower the phone, but I took a step back, keeping the lens locked on his face. "If you touch me, Brandon, the police will be here for battery before your real estate office opens tomorrow morning," I whispered. He froze, his face turning a deep, humiliated shade of red. I backed out of the front door, kept the camera recording until I reached my truck, and locked myself inside the cabin. They had spent years believing their lies could overwrite reality. They were about to learn that the digital legal system only cares about high-definition proof. They didn't stop after I left the ranch. In fact, they doubled down. My mother spent the next 2 weeks calling every extended family member, every old neighbor in the valley, and even the local church group, crying that I was a cold, calculating monster. She told everyone I was trying to extort my own aging parents for a property I hadn't spent a single dime to maintain, forcing them out on the street just to sell the land to a commercial developer. My father filed an official petition with the County Zoning and Agricultural Board, claiming my lease agreement was predatory and that the land rights should be legally reverted to them based on decades of continuous occupancy. Brandon even used his real estate firm's letterhead to send a formal dispute, trying to freeze my title deed under the guise of an equity family conflict. They wanted a public fight. They thought if they made enough noise and shed enough tears, the community would force me to back down. The formal hearing was set for a Tuesday morning at the county municipal building. My family arrived early, intentionally sitting on the front benches with a small crowd of their church friends and neighbors who had come to support them. My mother wore a plain black dress and held a tissue to her eyes. My father sat with a cane he didn't actually need, leaning heavily on Brandon's shoulder. Aunt Marlene sat in the back, whispering loudly to anyone who would listen about how greedy I had become. When the board chairman called my name, my mother stood up first, crying openly as she begged the committee to protect two honest, hard-working elders from an ungrateful daughter. Brandon stood up next, giving a polished, professional speech about family heritage preservation and how the $55 offer was more than fair for a ranch that required heavy structural repairs. The board members looked sympathetic. The crowd muttered in agreement. They thought they had won. I walked up to the podium with a single leather folder. I didn't cry. I didn't look at my mother's tears. I opened the folder, plugged my tablet into the projector system, and looked directly at the board chairman. I am not here to talk about family heritage, I said, my voice cutting through the murmuring room like ice. I am here to talk about compliance, fraud, and a documented breach of a legally binding contract. I projected the formal lease agreement signed by Grant and Lydia, followed by the video footage I had recorded 2 weeks prior. The screen showed my father perfectly healthy, laughing at the television without a cane, brand new luxury appliances in the kitchen, and Aunt Marlene's illegal long-term residence with boxes of high-end goods. Brandon's polished smile completely vanished from the front row. My mother's crying stopped instantly. They claimed they couldn't afford the rent due to medical hardship. I told the board. But their bank records, subpoenaed under my rights as the property owner, show consistent cash withdrawals matching the exact monthly revenue of Brandon's private dirt bike rental business, which they have been illegally operating on my pasture land without commercial permits. The room went dead silent. The board chairman leaned forward, his brow furrowing deeply. But I wasn't finished. I pulled up the final document. It was a certified copy of the county search and rescue log from 6 years ago, signed by the emergency dispatchers. 6 years ago. A mandatory evacuation order was issued for this valley due to a dam breach. My father, an employee of the county maintenance department, knew exactly how dangerous the rising currents would be. Yet, he chose to board up the windows of the office cabin from the outside, cut the main power breaker, and leave a 24-year-old girl trapped inside in total darkness. I projected the high-definition emergency photos of the cabin after the rescue team finally pulled me out. The waterline marked at chest height, the rafters scratched, the structural walls nearly collapsing. They didn't leave me behind by accident, I said, looking directly at my father, whose face had gone completely gray. They left me to drown so they could claim the structural insurance payout on a property they didn't even own. They have spent decades treating this land, and my life, as disposable assets. I am simply enforcing the consequences they spent a lifetime building. The county board didn't just deny my father's petition. They forwarded the structural safety reports and the documented contract violations straight to the district attorney's compliance office. Within 48 hours, the real estate firm where Brandon worked quietly removed his profile from their official website to protect their corporate image. The church community group that my mother had spent years using as a social shield went completely silent. People in our small valley community don't necessarily mind a family dispute, but they absolutely draw the line at a county official deliberately locking a 24-year-old girl inside a dark cabin during a catastrophic dam breach just to secure an insurance payout. The public sympathy they had carefully manufactured evaporated in less than a single afternoon. The formal eviction and property seizure took place exactly 2 weeks later. I didn't drive down to watch it happen. I didn't need to see my mother crying on the front porch as the county sheriff's deputies supervised the removal of their packed cardboard boxes. I didn't need to see my father standing awkwardly with his unneeded cane, or Aunt Marlene grumbling as her illegal belongings were stacked on the gravel driveway. Brandon was the only one who didn't show up. He was too busy trying to settle a private financial audit regarding his unpermitted dirt bike rentals. My attorney sent me a single text message at 4:00 p.m. confirming that the keys had been legally recovered and the locks to the Valley Ranch had been fully changed. That evening, my phone finally exploded with 74 missed calls from my father. When I didn't answer, he sent one final, long text message. There were no commands this time. There was no boardroom authority. He simply begged. He asked if I could at least let them rent the small back pasture cabin so they wouldn't have to move into a cheap apartment outside the county. He said they were getting older, and that a family should always find a way to forgive. I didn't call him back. Instead, I created a single group message, added my mother, my father, Brandon, and Aunt Marlene, and sent a scanned PDF of the original 6-year-old search and rescue report. Underneath the file, I typed one short sentence. You locked the door from the outside in the dark. Do not expect me to open it for you now. Then, I blocked every single one of their numbers permanently. I didn't sell the Valley Ranch to a commercial developer. Instead, I used my background in environmental risk and agricultural compliance to sign a long-term lease with a regional, nonprofit rescue network. The property is now a fully certified Valley sanctuary, specializing in emergency livestock evacuation training and providing rapid shelter for animals during flash floods. I also established a small emergency response fund in Nana Clara's name, helping local rural families secure proper evacuation transportation and emergency gear whenever the upstream dam level get dangerous. That mattered to me because the lesson of this journey was never just about cold revenge. Young adults are not property guards. Animals are not disposable assets. Family is not proven by last names, or bloodlines, or who cries the loudest at a local public hearing. Family is proven exclusively by who actively protects you when leaving you behind in the dark would be much easier. Some people will look at this and say I should have forgiven them sooner. I believe that forgiveness without absolute accountability is just an open invitation for the next cruelty. I do not wish them dead. I do not wish them pain for the sake of pain. I only wanted them to finally live inside the exact structural consequences they built for me. 6 years ago, I smiled in that dark, freezing cabin because I finally understood I was completely alone. Now, I smile because I am no longer trapped there. Our team is working hard to create meaningful and emotionally powerful scripts that connect with viewers. This is a fictional story created for educational purposes, designed to share valuable lessons through dramatic storytelling. This story reminds us that family should be built on protection, respect, and responsibility, not control or neglect. It also teaches that actions have consequences, and that choosing to protect yourself from toxic behavior can be an important step toward healing. Through Skylar's journey, viewers can reflect on accountability, emotional survival, and the true meaning of family.